What's important to you? My mission is to ask as many people as possible this question, because I believe once you know what's important, you can design and build a life of purpose, meaning, and fulfillment. My name is James Dean. I'm a life coach, and I hope this podcast inspires you to uncover what's important to you. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at James Dean Coaching, or connect with me on LinkedIn. You can also learn how I can help you understand what's important at jamesdeancoaching.com. Today's guest is the OT coach. He has been specialising in infant, child and parent mental health since 2011 and has a vast experience of working with complex trauma in a variety of settings, such as a parental assessment unit, residential care for teens, and working closely in the community with individuals who have been impacted by trauma. He applies his bespoke approach as an occupational therapist, applying sensory attachment interventions, positive psychology, and coaching. Today, we find out what's important to Padraig Danaher. Hi, Padraig. Thank you so much for joining me today.
James, thanks for having me. I'm very grateful to be here, so thank you.
Yeah, delighted you're here, and we're really looking forward to this chat. So we're going to dive straight in, Padraig, which is with the first question, which is, what's important to you?
I was thinking about reflecting on this yesterday and this morning, and it really shapes who asks and where I'm sitting at that time. If you were to ask me in relation to being a father, it's grabbing those moments that mean everything to me. If you're asking me into relation to my career, it's doing really meaningful work and doing right by the people I work for. If you're asking me on a personal level of what is really meaningful for me, it's living my best life and living my life true to me. I think living aligned with my values and not wasting any days for me. I don't want to live in regret. So making sure that every moment holds some level of meaning, or that I'm moving forward in a direction that I want.
It's interesting actually, because you're the first person who I've said is actually, well, it depends on the context sense of answering that question, and very sort of thinking that quite clearly in some way, that there's actually there's a slight difference and there's a nuance depending on the situation, which is really interesting, and that you have so that would mean to me, or maybe I'm wrong, but you have almost like you've thought about this before in a sense of a clear way, in a sense of like to really set yourself up in this way.
Yeah, and like for me, we all have different roles in our life, and my career is very meaningful to me, but it's a part of my life. My role as a father is a huge part of my life, but again, it's part of my life. And if you were to ask me when I'm sitting here painting with my daughter what's meaningful to me, it won't be my work. It won't be, I'm thinking of this really meaningful piece. It'll be grabbing the present moment of what's in front of me, creating really beautiful memories with my daughter and myself. That's what will be really meaningful for me at that time. Then if you're to ask me in the midst of work, and if I'm creating a plan of what I'm going to do for the day with a client, it'll be very much engrossed in making sure that I'm the best practitioner for that client that day. And then if you're asking what's meaningful for me in my moments in my life, it would be making sure my health is looked after. So it really flips, but it's because I'm really mindful of this question when I ask it at work, because from the lens of an occupational therapist as well as a coach, OTs are all about what is meaningful for you. We don't work off goals that other people believe is important for that person. We work off goals that is really meaningful for you. So if you come to me and I visually can see that there's these things that aren't going well in your life, I don't work on them unless there's something that you identify, because for loads of reasons, when we're working on a life that's meaningful for us, as clinicians, coaches, professionals around that person, once that person is really aligned with what is meaningful for them, we can all kind of step away from that process. When that view is clear, their motivation, their intrinsic motivation is very clear, very strong, and they'll go after whatever they need So I think we can kind of take a back seat. So, but yeah, it's the question can vary depending on the setting you're sitting in.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think what's interesting then, I suppose, then from when you going, obviously you're working as an occupational therapist and working in this field for a number of years. I'm interested then in the sense of, because what you said there is you're trying to get what's meaningful to the person, and the person you're working with is in front of you, to come out. I'm interested as someone who's maybe more at the starting blocks in a sense of their career in this same field, and someone who's a bit more experienced. How did you find sort of stepping back? Because I'm sure as a clinician, as a person, you wanting to help. So how did you find that as a challenge at the start, when you're kind of thinking, oh, I could see it for them, but you have to allow them to do it?
Yeah, absolutely. I've an undergraduate in social care and I've an undergraduate in occupational therapy. And OT definitely opened my eyes to finding goals that are meaningful for the person. But at the end of the day, from an occupational therapist perspective, we come in and we have a certain agenda. We have certain goals that we can see. There's certain areas in someone's life that we're like, are they engaging in meaningful activities? How are their day-to-day living at home? What's going on? How are their relationships? We have a checklist that we kind of go through. And then we have an abundance of information that it's all very heavily evidence-based. So we are ready to go with, here's your answer. And then I done the master's in positive psychology and coaching, and they just taught me to shut up and listen, just be quiet, start asking a bit more questions, elicit a little bit more of a space to unpack what's really meaningful. And I love the concept of listening, because we can all listen and I can hear words you say and repeat that sentence straight back to you. But really listening is hearing what you didn't say in those words and pulling that out. And then we really understand who you are and what is going on for you. As well as we develop that understanding, you start developing that understanding. And coaching for me was a fantastic space for me to understand, to allow that space to just be quiet, to just ask those right questions, to allow that conversation to flow, and leave off your mentoring hat or your clinician hat, keep on the coaching hat. So it was a very powerful tool, but I agree, James, it was a difficult one to learn. It wasn't easy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because when it's funny, actually, when I think in this sort of field, in sense of the whole sort of I don't know, say well-being, or this in the industry, or trying to help people, whether it be coaching, therapy, mentoring, that's kind of the reason why a lot of people go into it. But I think it's a general human trait of wanting to help people. I do think, even if in other industries, but it is the biggest challenge is to take that moment and to step back and allow someone to do it themselves. Because, and I'm sure you found it through your own work as well, as you said it earlier, though, once people do find that intrinsic, whatever it is, motivation, belief, drive, they'll go further than you actually thought that they would get to as well.
Absolutely. And when I work with a lot of young people and they come through the door and they will identify an area of their life that they might be having issues with, whether that be study skills, whether it be sleep, whether it be eating habits. And I have all of the research, the most recent research, the most up-to-date research. I familiarize myself with it regularly to say, well, if you do A, B, C, and D, you will have a better night's sleep. Here's some study skills. And I don't do that. That's not my format. I sit down and I really try to unpack, why do you want to eat better? Why is that really important to you? Why do you want a good night's sleep? What will that mean for you to get a good night's sleep? What would your life look like afterwards? Why do you want to have good relationships? Why do you want to do well in your Leaving Cert? Or why do you want to do well in this test or your college exams? Why? And I really ask the why. And I know with coaching, sometimes they say, not to ask why as if it's a critical question that, why are you doing that? But I'm asking their why. Yeah. What is your why? And I think that space for me, when they start unpacking that, they tend to start seeking that information themselves, and they tend to start seeing how it can apply in their lives. And rather than just meeting another person that's telling them, you should do this. This is going to improve your life, and your life will get better if you do A, B, C, and D. I just, because they might come in the door to me and they might identify these as a problem. Maybe family members might identify this as a problem. Maybe the family have suggested that this is a goal that they should work on. It's not something that they've identified. But when they do, you can really take a step back. You can give them the information, but they'll start being hungry for it and coming after you looking for it. So it's such an important shift for me, is sparking intrinsic motivation in young people. As soon as that is done, you, not young people, adults as well, I work with, finding that intrinsic motivation. And when they're living a life that's true to them and not living a life that they might believe they should be living, everything shifts.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we were chatting a little bit before, in the sense of the people you work with, and you're currently in a transition to maybe, or trying to expand in a sense of your clientele. But I'd be interested in the sense of, because you do work with a lot of young people and have, so far, I'd be interested in the sense of, like, was there something, the reason that attracted you to working with young people initially?
Yeah. Great question. And I think for me, there was a sentence said to me years ago about me starting my own practice and starting in this field. And somebody said to me, you might have become the adult that you needed when you were a child. And I think for me, that's the work that I do now. It's working with young people that maybe would have benefited me when I was younger, or many of my friends when I was younger, and unfortunately many of my friends who have recently passed away due to suicide or drug addiction. Sometimes they just needed that one good adult to give them a little bit of guidance, to say that I believe in you and I see something in you that you mightn't see in yourself, but I see that. And that reflection that we can see by one good adult truly seeing us is a game changer, because I had that in my life, and it was something that really shifted the direction of where my life went. It was just that one good adult. So it's really why I fell into this area, and why I love it, while it holds a lot of meaning for me, because I can see the power of it and I see it working. I see it come to life.
Absolutely. And just in a sense of, for context, in a sense of, for myself and anyone listening, is like, how long in a sense have you been sort of working in this sort of particular field? And the secondary question is that, have you seen changes throughout that time as well?
So my background I'm 38 now. My background for years would have been building trade, and then I would have worked in bars, farms, all these random jobs until I was around 26. And then I came back and I studied, and I got straight into volunteering and working with young people. And I've worked in that field then for the last 12 years. I've worked in residential homes with teenagers for 8 years. I was working in that sector, worked with family assessment units. I've worked with adults with ID, all in a residential style setting, many of whom have been experienced trauma, which is the area I specialize in. And then I started my own practice then 2 years ago. So but the main area I've worked in has all been working with young people, teenagers, early adulthood. And the shift that I have seen, I think people's awareness around trauma has come to light a lot. I've always been in this area, and while there's been the cohort of people who've been involved in it, understand that we have to develop awareness around the emotions behind behavior. For a lot of people, they still see the behavior first, and the behavior is challenging, and, well, they did something bad, so there needs to be a consequence, rather than this is their response to the trauma that they've been impacted by. So that the shift for me has been really, people are swaying away towards trying to understand behavior, trying to understand emotions behind behavior. So that for me, from starting to where I am now, I think there's a lot more, there's a greater awareness. I do a lot of work with schools and some fantastic teachers, principals, SNAs. They're amazing. And you can really see their curiosity to how we've always learned. Oh, they were bold. This is the consequence. End of story. To oh wow, they did this, but let's try to see what type of day they had. Oh well, they hadn't slept that night. They came from a home that was not safe. There's no food in their belly, and there's all of these things happening. Their window of tolerance is that narrow walking through the door. So a pencil fell on the ground and they lost it. So and this is the feedback. This is what teachers are like. So there's a real shift. So I think that's the greatest shift is understanding emotions behind behavior.
Mm.
And I think
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, it's a really sort of interesting insight, because and part of my curiosity as well is like my father was a social worker for 20 or 30 years. He sort of towards the end of his career, he moved more into mental health with adults. But his primary role was through working with schools, essentially, and kind of in some ways, what it reminded me of what he said. His kind of like, in the simplistic of way, he would be brought in when a child was being disruptive, as exactly you saying, almost like the teacher just wants this fixed in sense of this behavior. But as you say, there's so much more behind that to unpack, and the fact that it's almost like the fact now that it's, I say from that back then when he was doing it, it was just him, if you know what I mean. But as you say, that difference now of awareness of everyone is kind of like, no, we can't just, this isn't a hidden thing anymore. And it's like, it's very much more out there in the open. And I don't know if this is a thing to ask as well in relation to when I remember talking to him, like, you know, about his role and and sort of what he would, you know, get out of the work. And his things is like, he would say some of the simplest thing is like, just keeping a child in school was to finish whatever their schooling was a massive goal. So, you know, so I'm interested in the sense of, because you were saying now, instead of trying to work with those young people in the sense of for them to get that goal as well, because I'm sure there's parents who want certain goals, teachers are looking for things, you know, there's lots of other people involved to get a result, if that would mean. So is there something that, you know, how much autonomy is trying to find that balance between all those different parties?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's around education and educating parents and teachers. And if they're applying approach that they mightn't have had success with, it's about unpacking what might work. And if you were to ask parents might come with goals. I want my child to dress their bed, be up in the morning, smiling, cooking us all breakfast, and, you know, and general goals. But when you ask a parent, what do you really want from your child? I want my child to be happy. And like, that's what we're starting at. If we increase their happiness and their well-being, all of the rest of those things start coming together. So the core of every parent coming in the doors, that's all they want. So and sometimes we get a bit confused, or we think this will make you happy if you do this because it will make me happy, and maybe it should make you happy, or when I was your age it made me happy, so now that you're like that age, this will help. But the main core of what all parents want is that, and what all teachers want is to educate, to give children a space to learn. And if you increase on their space to self-regulate, to have a space of where they're calm and their happiness is increased, their self-belief is a positive one, their ability to learn will completely shift. So I am absolutely working on those goals that are meaningful for the parents, but we just come at it from a different lens. And they see it in a different light, because sometimes it might look like I'm out having fun and I'm just, you know, we're doing stuff that is meaningful for the young people. We might be playing basketball, we might be rock climbing, we might be feeding horses. It could be a variety of different things. So people say, oh, you just look like you're having fun. And I'm like, there's a whole lot happening behind the scenes. There's a lot of science going on in the background. And there's a lot of coaching, a lot of supporting, a lot of mentoring. There's a lot happening in those spaces. But I'm increasing their happiness, their well-being, doing things that are really meaningful for them. Now they're living a life that's true to them, and they can start then expanding. Their resilience has grown, their window of tolerance has grown, and they can start then engaging in other things that mightn't be exactly what they want to do, but they know that they need to do.
Absolutely. And it's because you say it's in those moments, and I think proving to the point that you said earlier about, it's like you being the adult that would have helped you as a child type thing, and instead them seeing that, whether it be positive role model, or someone even that they feel that they can be comfortable to say something to. And I think, and I know, so be interested in your perspective on this in relation to trauma, because there's obviously there's what we call the, obviously I think people will recognize it, what they mean by trauma in a sense of abuse, whether it be physical, sexual, verbal, sort of that sort of scale of trauma, which is not to be in any way minimized. But I think there's also a point of like some people could maybe have experienced a trauma, but it's not necessarily deemed as traumatic for everyone else. But for that individual, that young person, it was traumatic. So it's kind of like trying to go at it at a nuance and thinking like, just because it doesn't go under those sorts of horrific sort of categories doesn't mean that they haven't experienced something that is traumatic to them. And it's so they still need to be treated in a certain same way that they feel comfortable to talk to someone like yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would agree with that point. You might have many young people come through my door, or I've experienced when working with many young people who have come from what would be deemed as an extremely traumatic background, but that they're thriving currently in their life and they're doing well. And others that mightn't have come from a traumatic background, but have experienced trauma and are not doing so well. And I think, though, that you have to take weight in how the traumatic experience has impacted somebody internally. It's not about externally what happened, it's about their ability to manage that internally, how they responded. So it's looking at what level of resilience they had at that time, their mindset around that, how they viewed it. And it's not saying that somebody impacted by trauma in a negative way wasn't resilient, but their body responded in a particular way. So Gabor Mate would always say, it's not what happened to you, is what happened inside of you. And our body then responds to a traumatic experience. COVID, the lockdowns in COVID have been extremely detrimental for young people. And people on the outside might say, what's the problem? They put on some masks, they got a few weeks off school or a few months off school. It should have been easy. But that was extremely traumatic for many young people. And their viewpoint of the world was, if I touch someone I love, I could die or they could die. We have to wear these masks. There's an immediate danger all around us. And how they responded to it. Some have been fine, no issues there, because internally they processed it in a certain way. But then many young people internalized it in a very different way and are now today struggling massively. So trauma can be you hearing a door bang really loudly once when you were a child, and that traumatic experience could have triggered something within you that has permanently impacted your life. And then others might have experienced that and more and been okay. So it's really understanding. For me, it's when I meet somebody, we don't really unpack the deep past unless that's something that a young person wants to do. I'm dealing with the current needs. So it won't matter if somebody comes into me with complex trauma, a series of horrific events, or somebody has none of that. I'm looking at what they need now, today. And that's what we really work from, off that lens of work of a needs-based, not a diagnosis-based, not an assess-based. It's actually what you need today.
Yeah, totally get that. Absolutely. And I think it's a really interesting point that you just said. And I think maybe you could share a bit more in it in relation to the sort of the impact of COVID and lockdown and all those sorts of things. Because again, from I would be one of maybe, those of people's perspective, obviously being someone who's well past their teenage years as such, in sense of, because I think it's also the thing of, that I do know that the bit of research I know that the teenage brain is still so much developmental and thinks so differently to, an adult brain. So I'd be interested if you could tell us maybe a little bit more insight in a sense of that impact now that we're sort of even only a year, not even a year post pandemic, and in some way still going through parts of it.
Yeah, so many young people at the moment, anxiety has always been a factor for teenagers. I think it's been a difficult experience, but The fortunate side for many of them is they've had opportunities to lean into the uncomfortable and develop a sense of resilience, and be around school settings and people and awkward teenage years, and figure out who they are. And that comes from moments of embarrassment, moments of all of that. When COVID came, that was ripped from them. So they were now in their rooms, they were in a safe space. And they lost that opportunity to lean into the uncomfortable, to enter that circle of growth where we really grow when we're actually at a certain space of uncomfortable. Around a 7 or an 8 it's a great space to be. Things are a little bit awkward, things are a little bit uncomfortable, but we're building, we're learning. It's a great space. That was taken from them. So then when they enter back into the world 2 years later, the idea of asking for something in a shop is drowning them. So that might have been at their anxiety levels of a 6 before COVID. Now it's at a 9, where they're in panic mode. Their heart rate is going through the roof. So their response, which many people's response, which makes perfect sense, is to avoid anxiety. Completely pull back. I'm just going to avoid that situation because that makes me feel anxious. And immediately I feel good. So it's like, okay, that works. Unfortunately, in the long term, the more we pull back, the more we avoid, the shorter our comfort zone becomes. And it becomes very, very small, to the point for some young people, their comfort zone is their bedroom walls. It's not their house walls anymore. It's now their bedroom walls. Before, it might have been their community, their shop, their school. It's gone right back down to just their bedroom. So a lot of work is now just opening their comfort zone and bringing them a little bit into that circle of growth, a little bit uncomfortable, and rebuilding them so they can actually enter the community. But for me, that's the biggest thing that I would see since COVID is people's anxiety is through the roof, and it's all been down to not having opportunities to be embarrassed, to grow, to feel uncomfortable, and all of those things.
Yeah, that's a really interesting and sort of powerful perspective that I haven't really been hearing. You know, the sort of perspective that we would have been hearing more on sort of mainstream news and stuff would be, and not to say that it's not important, the things they were, you know, missing out on friendship groups, social occasions, but not on that nuance, in a sense of that, whether it be teenage years of not forced but inevitable embarrassment of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, falling over, making a fool of yourself, asking the girl, asking the guy, them saying no, then, you know, and everyone talk, or those, that everything we've all kind of gone through, just the normal sort of quote unquote normal things that we experience as young persons. So not having, so the whole thing of, because it's interesting thinking of, you know, as a young person thinking, almost consciously thinking to have to go outside their comfort zone is quite a different thing versus, well, it's all outside the comfort zone because you're learning everything you just out of osmosis such. So it's a very different perspective. So thanks for sharing that insight.
And I exactly all of those things that you described, like those awkward, you know, asking the girl, not, you know, falling over, like being embarrassed, all of what's happening in those moments is huge levels of growth. The problem is when you become 18, 19, you're expected to have gone through all of that. So you have a certain level of resilience built. And I've done a lot of reading recently on resilience and confidence, and which one should be swaying towards, because I've always really advocated for confidence, and confidence has been, I have found really a huge supportive building block in my career, in my life. But actually reading more recently, they're looking at more, it's resilience, and it's not about being confident enough to walk into a room and stand up and speak in front of a group. It's about being resilient enough that if it all goes up in the air and falls apart, that you're going to be okay, that if you miss a line, that if you get embarrassed, that you're going to be fine. Because at the start, none of those things go well. You don't speak perfectly, you get red-faced, your heart rate goes, all of these things. But are you going to be okay afterwards? And if you're not going to be okay, then you're not going to be leaning into it. So for me, it's really understanding that. And a lot of young people, they develop huge levels of resilience going through those phases.
Mm.
Unfortunately, now they're hitting 18, 19, and they're told, now you're an adult. No, you're 18. You've all this responsibility. You should be getting a job, making huge decisions around your career or what college you're going to pick. And they're like, I'm still figuring out childhood. I'm not ready for this. So.
Mm. Yeah, because when you were saying there, it almost they've missed. They say the other thing they've missed out in is that sort of opportunity for the outcome to be completely not what they expected, because it's even one of those things. I remember working with a mentor, and one of the, as I'm trying to sort of do what I'm doing in my stage of life, and it's this thing of like, when we become obsessed with the outcome and there being the right outcome for what we're wanting, versus being able to let go of whatever happens but still do it. So that sort of, as you say, coming back to that resilience, they've missed out on those 2 crucial years or 2.5 years of almost caring, but then, okay, if it goes wrong, it goes wrong, we carry on. So missing out on those crucial things and understanding that there is another opportunity. There may be another outcome, but if they've not even had to experience a variety of outcomes, they're only ever going to think on the one that they want. And if it doesn't come about, if that's the impact, as you say, that resilience being is like, well, they didn't get the actual outcome they wanted, whatever it was. That's the sort of, as you say, that can see them now why they would retreat back almost into themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and we're speaking about when things go wrong, and that's a huge part of life.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, as you spoke about, we all want the outcome that's a real positive one. That's not life. That is not that's it is. And social media, and I hate to be one of these people that are like with a pitchfork against Instagram and Facebook. Social media shows us a life that is beautiful and perfect and everything. Everybody's winning and everything is great. That is nobody's lived experience. Nobody ever. Like, that is absolute. I know thousands of people. Nobody's lived experience is perfect and winning all the time. If you are mastering an area of your life, I can guarantee you another area is suffering. I guarantee another area is failing. There is no one that is doing so well in one part of their life and that is following suit in every other aspect. There's something going wrong. So I think it's understanding that there's many countries that celebrate failure. Unfortunately, we don't. I think Japan, there's 1 or 2 countries that when you come home from school, they want to talk about what you failed in. Oh my God, you failed in maths. Brilliant. Excellent. Okay, what have we learned? Okay, brilliant. What are we going to do? That's congratulations on failing. They celebrate that because here's a moment for growth and learning. And we know ourselves, every aspect of our life, when we're under pressure and whether we put our body under physical pressure to failure, they're the greatest moments of growth. And that goes same from a psychological level. When we put ourselves under extreme pressure to a certain degree, there's huge levels of our growth comes from on a psychological level as well. So I think it's not being afraid of pressure, not being afraid of failure. Failure is learning. Failure is growth. Failure is positive. It's time to celebrate failure. And unfortunately, we've just went the other way, and social media has showed that everyone's winning and everything is beautiful. It's just that's nobody's lived experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. And I think that's absolute, that sort of celebration in the sense of and the normalization of it as well, in the sense of, as you say, the whole point is like everyone's lived experience is in this some way, that there's not any one person that hasn't gone through or is still going through at some point, where they're failing or not doing as well as maybe they would have hoped, imagined, whatever the case may be. So it's an important thing. And I'm interested in, I know you can't go into specifics, but in sense of like something like that, in a sense of that whole sort of area of failure, how is that, how do you communicate or get that sort of, because you say you don't want to tell especially a young person, the last thing they want to be, and any human wants to be told what to do, but how are you able to sort of invoke that sort of different perspective on failure with a young person. I'd be interested in what's the sort of, process.
Yeah. So at times, of course, the mentoring or the OT hat comes in, because many people come through the door and they're looking for answers, and they want support and help. So at times you definitely shift from different lenses, and I'm like, okay, this is the point, because they say, like, help me, what do I need to do to make things better? But the initial part is really unpacking their experience of failure. What happened to them when things went wrong? Asking them to tell me about stories where that went wrong, and talk to me about the experience, talk to me about what you learned, talk to me about, and they start then going through it in a space of, yeah, I didn't die. And, I actually met a really good friend from that. Oh, I did something really stupid in school, and I done something that on the first day entering school that I thought, I'm going to create a name for myself, and these 4 people aren't going to speak to me. Now they're my best friend. Yeah. And they then start going through those moments. And when people come home from a holiday, they speak about the things that didn't go well, and they laugh about them. They don't go, oh, I landed at the airport and we got there in time and the food was lovely. It's like, oh God, this happened and that happened. And their stories, it's our lived experience. So it's about creating and shifting that change of narrative, but it starts from them seeing it in a different lens. And it takes a little bit of that. What happened at those times for you? What was your experience? What did it feel like? And gaining some level of joy or humor around it.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's really sort of like you get, and it's something that's, I'm not saying it's simple to do, but a simple sort of, in a sense of shift in perspective, because it is the classic, in a sense. I was just thinking there is like the Billy Connolly story. It's like, goes camping, hated it, got drowned out of it and that, but you're laughing about it the next week with all your mates. It's those things are the sort of the more interesting aspects that everyone talks about. Absolutely.
Yeah. You forget, and it's not unfortunate, but you forget all the things that went well and the things that go wrong. If I ask anybody their experience of traveling, they'll tell me the time where they were on an 18-hour bus through South America. They will tell me about the time where they lost their wallet or their passport that's what sticks out. That's the part. And it's usually said with a sense of humor or a joke or a story. Nobody has told me that they've landed on time and they got there and the food was lovely and the people were very nice. No, that's not the story they go with. It's usually, so it's about getting excited about that and just understanding that is part of a process. It's part of the experience, and that's okay.
Yeah. And you say, I think then from sort of closing that loop in a sense of that resilience piece, because it's almost like when you're looking at it from that sort of perspective of the everyday, the sort of, you say, is that the something as simple as, say, travel. It might not be traveling around the world. It could be just traveling it, back and forth from school and the things. So it's making the sort of the normality of things going wrong or things not going the way we expected as a part of the story. So then when something more impactful or something more meaningful does happen, that they still have those skills and that mindset perspective to manage something that's maybe much more meaningful for them, because they've learned how to deal with it through the everyday things.
It's exactly that. You don't realize the skill set that you develop at those times, and nobody wants to do things that feel uncomfortable. Every part of your body wants to run away from it. I get that. I understand it. I know myself. But I know when I've leaned into it, I know that my comfort zone has expanded and it gets wider and wider and wider the more I lean into it. And then when it comes back to doing something that's truly aligned with you, or doing something from the lens of an OT, we're very interested in values. We're very interested in what's meaningful. But when we're doing an activity that we love, there can be a whole lot of uncomfortableness happening around, but we are in the zone. We're excited. We're so motivated. If I'm trying to develop on a young person's anxiety or maybe community integration, and I'm telling them to go to the gym or go to do a dance class, and they have no interest in it, it is an impossible task. But if they have a passion and they're like, oh, I love doing this, They will walk over a broken glass to make sure that it happens. And that's where we can, and that's them living true to them. And that's them living a meaningful life to them. So a whole lot of other things can go wrong in your life, but you are very clear on, oh, but I love this. And so I think it's when we start knowing that, that is a great way of enhancing resilience with young people. Really, I find it works really well.
Absolutely. To take it on from there, because which I think you mentioned, or I mentioned earlier as well, in the sense of part of what you're trying to do in expanding the way you work at the moment in your practice is now expanding in a sense of working with more adults as well, and in that regard. So tell me, in a sense of the sort of either reasoning or sort of that transition at the moment to try and include a sort of wider group of people in who you work with.
Yeah, I've had some fantastic mentors over my journey as a clinician and prior to becoming a clinician, and they've been amazing with me and have really guided me and opened my eyes to the impact that you can have when you're working with adults and in an adult education setting. And I know my limitations. There's only a certain amount of hours that I have. There's only a certain amount of clinician hours that I can see on a one-to-one basis working with young people. Unfortunately, that's just the nature of it. But when you're working with adults and you have a cohort of like a school, and you can do really positive work with a school, they have an amazing opportunity to have a huge positive knock-on effect on 500 kids that week, that day. So for me, it's about creating a bigger impact on the work that I do, and how can I then excel in that. And I think that's where the shift has come. It's seeing that there's limitations on me, there's limitations on my own caseload, how many people I can see in a week. Some people are long-term on my caseload, and that's the way things will be for a while. Some people come in and it's 2 or 3 sessions, and that's fine, but it's very limited on how much contact hours I have. So it's about opening up and having a greater impact in a wider amount of people. And if I can work with a school do a workshop with 30 teachers, I know that the information, the knowledge, the tips and tricks that they have learned, they're going to have a really positive effect on 500 kids that week. So that's kind of my shift now. It's like, how can I have a greater impact on the work that I do?
Okay. Yeah, no, I totally see, in a sense of, yeah, absolutely. It makes a huge amount of sense, in a sense of enable. And also, I suppose there's part of it as well, that there's you having a greater impact on a greater number of young people, but also as well, there's an empowerment level, I'm sure, for those teachers and adults you're working with, that they feel a sense of that they're able to have a greater impact on the people in their charge at that moment in time as well.
Yeah, and they're amazing, and they do an amazing job. They're in a space where they have a curriculum, and they're trying to do everything. They're trying to be the carer, the social worker, the minder, the educator. All of these roles they take on, and they do it with 30 kids at a time, 25 kids at a time, however that looks. But they're all hungry for knowledge and hungry for information, and they love it. And they're like, how can I do better? How can I do my job better? How can I support better? And sometimes it's just reframing. It's seeing things in a different lens, going, oh, that's why they said that. Or because they might feel themselves, I thought I did everything right, and I was really trying to be so nice to them, but oh, it's understanding that was too much safety, and then that made them feel unsafe. And so and they love it. And I can really hear fantastic feedback from the teachers, all saying that they're now implementing these strategies and they can see a difference in their class. So that's lovely. That's lovely to hear that feedback. But it's great that they're also really hungry for the knowledge. They're really hungry for it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's a really powerful sort of extension, in sense of the impact you can have. I'm going to go completely off topic now in some ways, and say, because obviously we've talked a lot about the importance of your work and what you do with those people. Is there something that's, and I know you mentioned your family and your daughter, but is there something that's completely outside of work that's important to you, that kind of for you to give you whatever it is, whether it's joy, excitement, peace of mind, whatever it is? There's something that, like, either a hobby, an interest, that's just for you that you feel is important?
Yeah, Yeah, the number one thing in my life, and some my family might find this hard, or my daughter, but without this, I am nobody, and that's health, fitness, moving my body. And I would run, I would do races, I would go to the gym, and if I don't value this as number one, I cannot be the person I am to everybody that I'm with, and I can't be my true self. I've removed fitness from my life. For a few months I had an injury, and I could really see everything in my life changing. My decision making was poor, my shoulders dropped, my mood was low, and I really wasn't my true self. So it's something that I value, something that I get a real buzz from. So it's movement, preferably outdoors, preferably trail runs or doing something like that. It really excites me, and makes me very grateful for my body, and the fact that it can move, and it has the resources to do, has the freedom to do these things, and I don't take any of them for granted. So it's actually what I value probably the most is making sure that I have those boxes ticked so that I can be the best version for everybody else. Because without that, I'm not the best version. So moving my body would be this thing that would be most meaningful to me. And that shifts, that can vary from running, cycling, gym work, yoga, CrossFit, Krav Maga. I'll go through phases where I'm engaging in different types of movement, but it's that is really meaningful. That's if I have spare time, I'm moving my body.
Yeah.
That's where I go. I'm like, oh yeah, what can I do?
Yeah, love it. And I really love the way that you've put that in the sense of moving your body. And because it's like, I think this is, and the reason I say is I think the sort of language around it is really important. The way I would have always, my thing would be just physical activity. You know, it's because, and I would have been, and it's interesting in a sense because I'm into running myself and long distance type stuff. So marathons, triathlons, that sort of stuff. And I hadn't done anything for a couple of years I was kind of taking over with during COVID and stuff, but it definitely dropped off. And over this last year, this year, I've started back up training fully again because I've got a place in the London Marathon.
Great stuff.
Yeah, which was supposed to be in 2020, but it's like, yeah, exactly 3 years later. But it's interesting in a sense of, and what you were just saying there, and of like the change and the shift. It's almost like, because I'd stopped so long, it was almost I didn't realize. I was kind of tipping in and out and doing bits and pieces, but I wasn't doing it in a sort of real continuous sort of consistent sort of manner. And for myself, I found it quite interesting getting back into even just some sort of consistent routine and program, the shift in myself again. So and so it's like my choices at the moment is running, but I've done, as you say, you shift into different things. But I think it's the for anyone, and what I love there is the fact that you listed off so many different things that people can do. And I think people get caught up in thinking either it's only got to be running or the gym. And this like the sort of world of physical movement, is so vast and so many different things that people could do. And again, the positive impact it has cannot be understated.
Not at all. We have a pharmacy within our bodies full of these positive hormones and drugs that are actually in every part of our genes, and they come out when we move our body. So you're feeling low, don't be going to a pharmacy. Move your body and watch everything shift. It's incredible what our bodies can do. Just allow them to do it. Every part of our society has made us stagnant. Sitting in a chair, we have this Zoom call, I didn't have to go and meet you or travel anywhere. Everything is so accessible. TVs, internet, phones, everything is designed to make us stop moving. And that's why depression, anxiety, everything is going through the roof. When we start moving, and when I say moving, doing something meaningful, but pushing ourselves a little bit, not just slightly moving, actually, whether that be dancing in your kitchen, whether that be carrying something upstairs with a bit of weight. That's like, if you're like, oh, I don't really want to exercise, there's loads of things you can do in your house that will increase your heart rate and get those things going. So it's finding what's meaningful for you in movement will encourage you to repeat that habit formation. And like James, you're obviously like an athlete where you run, cycle, swim, do all of those things. And I love all of those. Many young people I work with and adults don't. I'm like,
Yeah.
if you don't, never do it.
Yep.
You know, find something you love. That might be spinning class. Excellent. Great. That might be
Yeah.
boxing. That might be boxing this year. And next year it won't be.
Yep.
Make sure you're moving your body.
Absolutely.
You have to do it. It's the
Yeah.
science is so clear. There's an abundance of research. It isn't an opinion I'm giving you. It's
Oh.
heavily backed in research. There's an abundance of papers to say this is why we need to move, and this is what's going to happen when you do move.
Totally agree. Completely echo that, and I completely echo what you just said. It's like that thing of, because I used to, I think I mentioned it to people before. I used to do some like running clubs and stuff in the company I used to work with, Couch to 5K and then beyond if people are interested. And you know, because that's my thing. It's like I do, and I love that sort of feeling of like when I'm into like a 2 hours, 3 hours in. That's where I start to feel that I'm actually doing it. But I would be taking people out for a 5K, and then they'd be halfway around. They go, "I really hate running," and you're like, "That this isn't why I'm bringing you here. This is I'm trying to share a passion and a love and something exciting. I'm not here to punish you. I'm not the drill sergeant." So you're kind of hurting me here. So it's like, just there's so much more things out there that people could do. So I hope, even if anyone listening is like, just try something again. And as you say, try something else, try something else, try something else.
And that's it. For some people, running they'll always hate. And do I always love every run? No, I don't. Do I always run every cycle? No, I don't. Do I always love every gym session? No, I don't. Probably I love it less than I like it, or I probably like it less than I love that I don't. I find that sometimes we have to have that level of discipline that I know I need to do this at times, but then there is things like running that just will never be somebody's thing.
Yeah.
So don't do it. Find something else. There will be something where you will start connecting your movement to your mood, and you'll be like, oh, this feels really good. Oh, I love this. That's when that shift comes, it gets you kind of hooked and addicted to it. It's like, oh, I love this. So find it, whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I'd always like to ask my guests as they come on is, I really do have a fascination and love of quotes and phrases and how they can have a positive impact on us all. So I'd love to know if there's any quotes or phrases that are important to you.
Yeah, there's two that I nearly live my life by. One is, he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. And I think we've discussed this in this talk. It's really looking at, are we living our why? Are we living our life that's meaningful for us? And when we are, we can go through the hardest and the toughest times. And when the tough times come, but we know there's a purpose for it, I think that's something that's really meaningful. One that has really stuck out to me recently is, the true definition of hell is when your last day on earth, the person you became meets the person you could have become. And for me, that's again saying that you have lived a life that is not meaningful for you. And when you look back at your life, the number one regret that people have in palliative care when they're about to die is, I wished I did something that was true to who I was and stopped living a life that everybody else wanted me to live. And I think, while I'm very much living in the present, I think it's really important not to be always living of what I might be thinking about in the future. And in the future, I'll be worried about what I was thinking about in the past. What that knowledge base gives me is knowing that I have power in the now, in the here, the now, the moments, the actions that I do, that I can live a life that's meaningful to me. And that's what I work with a lot of young people and adults around as well. It's how can we stop that from happening? What are you doing today that's really important for you? And are you living a life that's meaningful for you? The greatest, for me, the greatest thing that has, there's been many shifts in my life, but one of the shifts has been when I left Ireland, and I spent about 5 years outside of Ireland. But my first big trip when I was maybe 19 is, I went to Portugal, and I met a lot of people in Portugal. and I got to introduce myself as me. And it was my first time out of my hometown, starting new friendships and you put your hand out, and it's nearly like a fresh start of this is who I am, and this is who I want to be, rather than the image that we might have picked up as we were growing up, or what people expected of us, and this is who I am, or oh, sure, he's that person's friend, or he's this. It's like, no, this is who I am. So I think that space for me has shifted my life, and it's one of those kind of moments that I'm like, oh yeah, that's a game changer in me knowing that I'm now living a life that's true to me.
Absolutely. No, thanks for sharing them, because I think they're very you say it's that sort of brings you, both of them can bring you back to, as you say, to the moment, and as we've been talking about, the whole thing of what is meaningful. So they really are really powerful. Following on from that, then, has there been excuse me, has there been any people that have had a big influence on you, whether it be private or in the public eye?
Yeah, it's so many. It's like so many. From a public perspective, there's been so many people. From a private perspective, there's been so many. My daughter has been a huge influence in how my whole lens of life has shifted. But to hone in on the one person that really had such a positive impact in the direction of my life, where they mightn't have seen it, was when I was quite young. I was maybe 15, 16. I had a job, I was an early school leaver, and she saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And she was that one good adult. And it was the power of her presence, the power of her positive lens on me, saying that you're going to be somebody. Or when I suggested that I could do this job, it was like, oh great, let's have a look, see what jobs are out there that are that. It was and it was a real shift in something that I was like, oh, maybe I can be who she believes I could be. So I went back a few years later to her to give that moment of gratitude and thanks. And I think if you have that person in your life, please go to them and tell them, you shaped my life, you had this positive impact on my life. Not only will it increase your own, there's huge research on this, not only will it increase your own happiness and well-being, but you'll have a huge positive knock-on effect on their own life. So find that person who has had a positive influence on you and tell them. It's a game changer, really. So that for me, that would be one. She was an employer, and she was just amazing, and just saw me in a different light and thought, you're going to be somebody. And I was like, wow, okay. So
that's huge. And I think when I talk and I ask people this question, it's a really, and I was even just chatting to someone yesterday about this as well. And I think sometimes it's not to say, and I think I said the same thing yesterday, we don't necessarily, influences can come from anywhere. And I think that word now is unfortunately taken different meaning when it comes to online, taking an influence from someone. But they don't necessarily have to be someone that's that abstract and out there in a sense of they can be so much closer to you than you would actually think. And actually those people that you say that you can actually have that physical and real sort of connection with them, it can be so much more impactful if you're willing to look a bit closer to home, that you can find those real positive influences. Because you say, and it's from what you were saying with that story that you shared there, is like it comes back to that genuine, real connection that person was able to kind of, as you say, just whatever there was that external belief in you that allowed you to believe in yourself. It's very, very powerful.
It's the power of that one good adult. And moments in our life that are the game changers are sentences. They're not a 6-week workshop we went to. It's not a 4-year course. It's a sentence. It's a moment. So just to understand the power that's in them. They are very powerful. We have them at our will every second. So when we can be really present, grab that moment, be really present. And if you see something, authentically see something positive in somebody, say it to them. Yeah. And it's not about going around giving affirmations to people and saying you're brilliant when you don't believe it. If you don't believe it, it's more detrimental for you to be saying it. Just find it, see it, and help them use you as a mirror of how the world sees them in a positive light. And I think it's a game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. My final question, Padraig, may just contradict what we've just been saying, but I'm going to ask it anyway. But my final question is going to be, what's important for your future?
To live a life that I don't regret. That's what's important for my future. To live a life that's meaningful, to have a positive impact on as many people's lives as I possibly can, and to just know that I have lived the best version of myself. That's
Love
probably,
it.
Yeah, that's meaningful for me in my future.
Absolutely. Padraig, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you, and I really appreciate you coming on and sharing everything that you have. I want to make sure that people do support you, so we will make sure everything's in the notes, but if you want to share where people can follow and connect with you online, go ahead now.
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, Padraig Danaher. You'll find me there. My website is www.the-𝙬𝙤𝙬𝙘𝙠, and you'll find me on Instagram, which is _the_OT_coach_.
Brilliant stuff.
Yeah.
Great stuff. As I said, all of those links will be in the show notes, so you'll be able to follow and connect with Padraig there. Once again, Padraig, thank you so much for joining me today.
James, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to What's Important to You. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, and share. And make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Again, you can follow me at James Dean Coaching on Facebook and Instagram. Connect with me on LinkedIn or find out more about me on jamesdeancoaching.com.